it's been a few years, so I guess it's time for people to start complaining about Crunchyroll again. I haven't even been plugged in on the anime side of the internet for that long. But it's certainly been long enough to have seen this cycle happen at least a few times. And while some of the things that people are complaining about now are new, most of them are just different flavors of the same complaint. So I want to offer a sincere defense of Crunchyroll as a product and a half-hearted defense of Crunchyroll as a company. Not because I think Crunchyroll deserves defending or anything, but because I'm tired of hearing people rehash the same complaints every couple of years. Especially when so many of these complaints are bad. So let's get started. Number 1, Crunchyroll, the streaming service, is good actually. So I'm old, which means the way that I watch anime is by downloading apps onto my Apple products. And 95% of the anime I watch comes through either the Crunchyroll, HiDive, or Netflix app through my Apple TV. This setup is easy and seamless, and I don't want it to change. One of the reasons it's so easy and seamless is because the Crunchyroll app just works. And I know that sounds like the minimum requirement you should have for a streaming service, and I think that's a fair expectation for big streamers like Netflix or Disney+. But Crunchyroll is a niche app, and anyone who's ever interacted with niche apps knows that simple functionality isn't always guaranteed. I'm looking at you, HiDive. I've used Crunchyroll for nearly 10 years, and I can't think of a single time I've ever had an encoder error or severe lag or a frozen app. And for one of the cheapest streaming services that I use, I think that's something to highlight even if my experience is unique. Number 2, the UX is fine. A pretty common complaint I hear about Crunchyroll is its design and its user interface. And I don't know UX very well, I'm just a normie when it comes to design in digital spaces, but I at least know my way around Crunchyroll's app. It's easy to search for shows, it's easy to browse the catalog, it's easy to add shows to a watch list and then come back to them later. It's simple to switch languages, pause, rewind, fast forward. All of the basic video streaming stuff is easy to find and easy to use. And I'm old, so if it's easy for me, it's probably easy for most people, at least on this side of the world in my language. I can't speak for any other. Could the UX be better? Yeah, probably. One complaint I have about Crunchyroll's interface is that it doesn't allow me to browse a section dedicated to movies. The one feature HiDive has that Crunchyroll should probably adopt. But otherwise, it's super simple to navigate to all of the things that I want to navigate to. Number 3, Crunchyroll is really cheap. I pay for the basic service, which costs $7.99 a month. And it's one of those monthly expenses that I barely think about. So much so that I've wondered how much I've been paying $7.99 a month for Crunchyroll. I went into my bank statements and I found out that I've been at that price point for at least the last 2 years. And possibly longer, but my banking app doesn't allow me to scroll past the summer of 2022. I understand that terms like cheap and expensive are relative to your financial position, and if you can't afford $7.99 a month, then that makes it an expensive service. But you can compare it to other big streaming services, all of which right now are at least twice the cost of Crunchyroll. In fact, the only streaming service that I subscribe to that's cheaper than Crunchyroll is HiDive, which makes sense because it's not as good. Like any app, Crunchyroll absolutely has room for innovation and improvement. But this old guy right here isn't really interested in all of that. All I really care about is that a streaming service is easy to use, doesn't crash, and is cheap, and Crunchyroll is one of the few that checks all of those boxes. So that's my meager defense of Crunchyroll as a product and basically where I stand as this new wave of complaints rolls around. So, what are people complaining about this time? If you're not up to speed, the complaints kicked off when Crunchyroll removed the ability for users to comment on its videos after a deluge of homophobic comments turned up on the show Twilight Out of Focus. And it seems like the primary complaint this time around is that Crunchyroll would rather kill its comment section than do the bare minimum effort to moderate. And while I think this is valid feedback, for the most part, I don't think it's coming in good faith. Based on this outpouring of disgust for Crunchyroll, it would seem as if the comments section was this beloved feature of the app, when I suspect that it was simply a liked feature that people are overhyping now as an excuse to shit on Crunchyroll. Which is not to say that it wasn't a good feature or that some people didn't find it useful, but it's not even close to the only place you can comment about anime episodes on the internet. I mean, I don't really comment on 4chan and Reddit and my anime list, but I know a lot of people do. Maybe this is just me being out of touch, but I sincerely wonder how many people actually thought the comments section was worthy of saving before it was taken away. And it would be kind of poetic if I felt that this outpouring of complaints was sincere, but instead, it kind of just feels like the catalyst to rehash the complaints that Crunchyroll has been getting for years. Which, in my opinion, are also pretty weird. Old complaint number one: Crunchyroll is trying to monopolize anime streaming, and monopolies are bad. I think both of these statements are fundamentally correct, but even if Crunchyroll were to get every single anime on its platform, I would hesitate to call it a monopoly. Because anime is still such a niche entertainment product that anime streaming services aren't just competing with other anime streaming services. They're competing with every single entertainment option that a viewer has. We already have examples of streaming services that monopolize their content but don't behave in the way that we think monopolies do behave like. NFL Sunday Ticket, for example, has a monopoly on out-of-market NFL games, literally the most popular televised content in the country. And you would think that because it has a monopoly on such a valuable product, it would be able to charge its customers thousands of dollars per year and get away with it. But it can't, because the NFL isn't really in competition with other football leagues, but with sports and entertainment as a whole. If the NFL charges too much for its product, people would just go watch hockey or basketball or movies. And the same goes for Crunchyroll. No matter how many anime titles Crunchyroll vacuums up, it will always be in competition with Hulu and Netflix and Disney+. Which is why the worst case scenario of monopolistic behavior, exorbitant price increases, is unlikely to pass on to us. Oldish complaint number two: Crunchyroll keeps removing titles that I like. Which, yeah, that sucks, especially if there's no competing service to pick them up. And it's also not fundamentally different from what every other streaming service does. Crunchyroll needs to add like 20 new seasons of anime every 3 months in order to keep pace with the seasonal calendar. And that costs money in server space and maintenance and licensing fees. The easiest way to offset these costs is by unloading old shows and movies, which has become standard practice for Netflix and Paramount Plus and Max and every other streaming service. Crunchyroll could absolutely keep every show that it brings on, but that would raise its expenses every season, and that cost would pass on to us. And I strongly suspect that people complaining about Crunchyroll dropping shows wouldn't want their monthly subscription price to rise every 3 months. Old complaint number three: Crunchyroll doesn't pay its translators well. This is a valid complaint that has been true for years that has made me genuinely upset at Crunchyroll. Especially when we know that Funimation paid translators better, and so did HIDIVE, though I'm not sure if that still holds true. Of all of the Crunchyroll complaints, this is the one that I sympathize with the most. But the harsh truth is that there really isn't anything that can be done about it, because AI is coming for all of that. And as someone who writes for a living, I have no love for AI services replacing people in the anime translation game. But I think it's also important to understand that we've already lost this particular battle. Because if a union as powerful as SAG-AFTRA is struggling right now to keep AI out of Hollywood, I don't think there's much of a chance for anime translators. And that makes me really sad. But, and I don't say this lightly, I think it's important to point out when companies like Crunchyroll act outside of the boundaries of its free market context. Because at the end of the day, Crunchyroll is a business, and it's always going to act in the best interest of its bottom line. I would argue that most people that have a problem with how Crunchyroll operates as a business actually should have a problem with free market capitalism. And if you have a problem with capitalism, boy, do I have the guy for you. But I have a strong suspicion that most people that complain about Crunchyroll's business practices are not actually dyed-in-the-wool socialists, especially considering all the ugly comments that kicked this off. Woof. So I started having some of these thoughts when I got a promotional email from Crunchyroll that outlined the hours that I had spent watching anime on its app during the spring season. And while I am by no means a Crunchyroll power user, I was still delightfully surprised to see how much time I spent on this app for 3 months. And there were two thoughts that I had. One, I found this email really useful. And two, I don't think there's a paid streaming service that I use more than Crunchyroll, which made me reflect on how much I enjoy Crunchyroll as a product, even if I don't think highly of Crunchyroll as a company. A bit of a PR bind that Crunchyroll suffers from is that no one praises it when it does well, but everyone shits on it when it does poorly. And I think that's totally fine. I think we need to shit on companies more as our default behavior. But I at least want these complaints to make sense and come from a place of good faith. What especially irritates me about these mainstream complaints about streaming services is that they usually end up as advocacy for piracy. And while I think there are very few things and ideas in the media landscape that are inherently bad, piracy is one of them. People work hard to make the content you love, and they deserve to be compensated for that work, period. Are they being compensated enough through streaming services like Crunchyroll? Hell no. But you know what really doesn't pay them? Stealing content. And I'm tired of piracy advocates twisting themselves into a pretzel defending the virtues of theft. Especially when there's a cheap and reliable service that streams most of the seasonal anime calendar. There are definitely reasons to complain about Crunchyroll, and I invite people to share those complaints as much as possible. But if your solution to the problem is employing a method that makes it worse off for the people that create that content, man, yeah, that just sucks. As a community, we need to do better in identifying the real causes of our frustration and better responses to that frustration. What exactly that looks like, I don't know. But can we at least start putting some more blame on those homophobic commenters? What fucking losers, right?